The sun had barely risen, spilling pale gold through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the billionaire's mansion, yet the house was already alive with a quiet, tense energy. Aisha, the family's maid, moved through the grand living room with careful precision, dusting the ornate furniture and arranging the silk cushions on the pristine sofa. Her movements were graceful, almost invisible, but the tension in the air made her hands shake ever so slightly. Across the room, Crystal, the billionaire's wife, sipped her coffee, her eyes scanning Aisha with an unmistakable look of disdain. "You call this clean?" Crystal snapped, her voice dripping with contempt as she tapped her manicured nails against the porcelain cup. Aisha froze for a brief moment, her back stiffening. She had been with the family for 5 years, enduring insults, sharp words, and the constant reminder that she was beneath them. Yet she never retaliated. Today was no different, her lips pressed into a thin line, her heart beating faster, but she kept her eyes lowered, trying to focus on her task. Crystal's piercing gaze lingered on her, a silent accusation in every glance, as if Aisha's very presence in the room was an affront to the luxury surrounding them. The mansion itself seemed to echo the tension. The polished marble floors gleamed almost aggressively under the sunlight. The chandeliers sparkled like cold diamonds, and every painting and artifact seemed to judge Aisha silently. She worked faster, hoping to finish before Crystal found another reason to belittle her. But as she straightened the last cushion, Crystal leaned back in her chair, a smirk curling on her lips. "Honestly, Aisha, sometimes I wonder if you were even born to do anything useful," she said, taking a slow sip of her coffee. Aisha's hands trembled slightly, but she said nothing, swallowing the sting of humiliation. Deep down, she knew something Crystal couldn't see. Patience and courage weren't measured by words, they were measured by actions, and one day, actions would speak louder than insults. Crystal was in a rush, clicking down the long marble hallway in her high heels, her designer handbag swinging with an almost theatrical flair. She had a gala to attend, and punctuality was everything for someone who thrived on appearances. Aisha, ever diligent, followed at a careful distance, ensuring every step Crystal took didn't disturb the perfect order of the mansion. But in her hurry, Crystal failed to notice a small, wet patch on the polished floor, a streak of water left from Aisha's earlier cleaning. Her heel caught the slick surface, and in an instant, she was sliding, arms flailing, eyes wide with panic. Aisha's heart leapt into her throat. Without thinking, she lunged forward, grabbing Crystal's wrist just as she was about to tumble down the wide staircase. Crystal's body hit the wall with a soft thud, and for a second, silence reigned. The mansion, usually filled with the hum of quiet order, felt suddenly ominous, as if holding its breath. Crystal froze, staring at Aisha with shock and indignation. What are you doing?" she exclaimed, trying to wrench her arm free. Aisha held firm, her grip gentle yet unyielding. "I've got you," she said calmly, almost softly, but with a firmness that left no room for argument. Crystal's pride flared, her chest heaving as she realized she had been saved from a fall that could have seriously injured her. Anger warred with gratitude in her expression, her eyes narrowing while her heart raced. She hated admitting it, but Aisha had prevented a disaster. Aisha's pulse was racing too, her hand still gripping Crystal's arm, but her calmness surprised even herself. She had acted instinctively, knowing that words would never come between a life-threatening moment and the choice to protect someone, even someone who had insulted her countless times. Crystal finally pulled back slightly, brushing her hair from her face and smoothing her dress, trying to regain composure. But the glitter of the gala, the soft morning light, and the polished perfection of the mansion couldn't mask the truth. For once, Crystal was powerless, and Aisha was the one in control, not with authority, but with courage and presence. The night air was crisp as Crystal arrived at the charity gala, the city lights twinkling like distant stars below the towering windows of the luxury venue. She moved with the practiced grace of someone used to admiration and attention, her heels clicking confidently on the polished marble floors. Guests whispered and smiled, the chandeliers casting a golden glow over the glittering crowd. But Crystal's mind was elsewhere, still simmering from the morning incident. She couldn't shake the image of Aisha's hands gripping her wrist, steady and strong, saving her from a dangerous fall. She had almost fallen herself, and yet she had reacted with indignation, not gratitude. Now, standing amidst wealthy philanthropists, Crystal felt a subtle, gnawing unease. As she mingled, her assistant leaned close and murmured, "By the way, people are talking about your maid. Apparently, she prevented a serious accident at the mansion this morning. The story's spreading." Crystal stiffened. A sense of disbelief mixed with pride and shame churned inside her. She forced a polite smile, nodding at a group of socialites who asked her opinion on the gala's charity initiatives. But inside, she was thinking of Aisha, humble, quiet, and unnoticed amidst the grandeur of the mansion. Aisha herself moved through the gala with understated elegance, dressed simply yet impeccably, her dark skin glowing under the soft lights, her eyes calm and observant. She didn't seek attention. She didn't crave praise. Yet whispers of her courage had reached the crowd, the story of how she had prevented a serious accident spreading quietly among the attendees. Crystal caught sight of her from across the room and felt an unexpected pang of humility. Here was the maid she had belittled countless times, moving with a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with Crystal's own anxious need for approval. The realization hit her like a cold wave. All the wealth, the designer gowns, the sparkling jewelry, meant nothing in comparison to courage and quick thinking, the very qualities she had ignored in Aisha for years. Crystal's heart sank as she reflected on her own arrogance, on the countless times she had insulted a woman whose strength and humanity far exceeded her own sense of superiority. That night, amidst laughter and clinking glasses, a subtle shift began in Crystal's consciousness, the first flicker of awareness that she might have underestimated the person who had always been there to protect her. Weeks had passed since the gala, and the mansion had returned to its usual rhythm, quiet, orderly, and tense. Crystal had tried to push the memory of Aisha's courage to the back of her mind, but fate had other plans. One stormy evening, as rain lashed against the towering windows, Crystal found herself alone in the house. The wind howled, rattling the shutters, and shadows flickered across the walls. She was in the study, reviewing gala invitations, when a sudden noise froze her blood, a muffled crash from the direction of the main hall. Her heart raced, and she realized, with a spike of fear, that an intruder had broken in. Panic clawed at her chest as she reached for her phone, but it slipped from her fingers, landing somewhere under the heavy velvet chair. She screamed, a short, sharp sound that was swallowed by the storm outside. Then, almost as if summoned by instinct, Aisha appeared at the doorway. Her eyes were sharp, unwavering, and full of resolve. "Stay behind me," she ordered calmly, though her voice carried the weight of authority that Crystal had never heard from her before. Crystal's chest heaved, her pride and fear battling for dominance, but she did as she was told. Aisha moved forward, silent yet decisive, confronting the intruder with a bravery that seemed almost otherworldly. Using quick thinking and sheer courage, she subdued the man, holding him firmly until the police arrived. Crystal, trembling and soaked from the rain that had seeped in through a slightly ajar window, watched in awe. Every insult she had hurled at Aisha flashed through her mind, each one now unbearably heavy with guilt. The realization was stark and painful. The woman she had treated with disdain, the maid she had looked down upon for years, had literally saved her life. Aisha's dark eyes met Crystal's, calm but unyielding, and in that moment, the dynamics of the mansion shifted irreversibly. Crystal's chest tightened with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and shame, understanding at last that true strength and courage often came from the most unexpected places. The mansion felt different the morning after the intruder incident. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and the marble floors glistening under the early sun. Crystal sat at the breakfast table, hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee, her mind replaying the terrifying moments from the night before. The guilt weighed heavily on her chest. Every insult, every harsh word she had ever directed at Aisha now felt like a betrayal she could not undo. She had always believed herself untouchable, surrounded by luxury and privilege, yet it had taken a single moment of danger to reveal her true vulnerability. The sound of soft footsteps approached, and Aisha appeared in the doorway, carrying the morning's tray. Her calm expression was a stark contrast to the storm of emotions inside Crystal. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Crystal's pride warred with her conscience, but finally she found her voice, shaky but sincere. "Aisha, I want to apologize," she began, the words unfamiliar on her tongue. "I've treated you unfairly. I didn't realize how brave you are, how much you saved me." Aisha set down the tray, her movements steady, her eyes meeting Crystal's without anger, but with a quiet firmness. "Actions speak louder than words," she replied softly, her voice carrying both grace and strength. Crystal felt the truth of that statement settle deep in her chest. It wasn't just a polite admonition, it was a reminder that courage and loyalty could never be measured by status or wealth. For the first time, Crystal truly saw Aisha, not as a maid or a subordinate, but as a person whose integrity and bravery had saved a life. In that silent moment, something shifted between them, a fragile thread of trust beginning to form. Crystal realized that respect had to be earned, not demanded, and that humility was not a weakness, but a strength she had long ignored. Aisha's forgiveness was quiet, patient, but unmistakable, and Crystal felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. It was the start of a new chapter in the mansion, where gratitude and respect would finally replace arrogance and disdain. The mansion itself seemed lighter, the polished surfaces reflecting not just light, but a new awareness, an understanding that true value lay in character, not luxury. In the days that followed, the mansion's atmosphere began to shift in subtle but unmistakable ways. Crystal, once haughty and impatient, now regarded Aisha with a quiet attentiveness she had never shown before. She asked for Aisha's opinion on simple household matters, how to arrange the flowers, which linens suited the living room, even small adjustments to the breakfast menu. Each time Aisha offered advice, Crystal listened, sometimes with surprise at the depth of her insight. The maid, for her part, continued her work with the same grace and efficiency, but now her posture carried a newfound confidence. She no longer flinched at sharp words or dismissive gestures, because she sensed that her value was finally recognized. The dynamic between them was no longer defined by dominance and submission, but by a mutual acknowledgement of abilities and trust. Crystal began to see Aisha as more than a helper. She was a guardian of the household, someone whose intelligence and courage had repeatedly kept the family safe. Even the household staff noticed the change. Crystal spoke more kindly, offered small gestures of appreciation, and no longer belittled Aisha in front of others. There was an unspoken understanding growing between the two women, one that required no words to define. They moved through the mansion with a new rhythm, a silent cooperation that made the household run more smoothly than ever before. Crystal's pride had been tempered by experience, and Aisha's patience had been rewarded with recognition and respect. It was a delicate balance, one that could have easily tipped back into old patterns, but both women were aware of the lessons learned. One evening, as they both arranged the living room for a family gathering, Crystal paused and looked at Aisha. "Thank you," she said simply, and there was no hesitation in her tone. Aisha nodded, a small, knowing smile crossing her face. For the first time in years, the mansion felt truly like a home, not just a symbol of wealth, but a place where courage, respect, and understanding had reshaped relationships. The air itself seemed lighter, the sunlight on the marble floors warmer, as if the house itself acknowledged the transformation. A new chapter had begun, one where actions and integrity mattered more than status or titles, and where mutual respect could coexist with luxury, power, and grace. Life in the mansion had settled into a rhythm of cautious harmony, yet tranquility often hides the seeds of tension. One afternoon, Crystal was reviewing documents in her private study when she noticed something unusual: a series of large, unusual transactions on her husband's account, flagged by her assistant. Her brow furrowed, curiosity tinged with unease. Meanwhile, Aisha moved quietly in the background, dusting the shelves with her usual precision, unaware of Crystal's growing worry. But as the minutes passed, Aisha noticed the sudden tension in the air. Crystal's hand trembled slightly over the papers, her usual composure cracking for the first time in weeks. "Aisha, do you know anything about this?" she asked, her voice hesitant, almost vulnerable. Aisha glanced at the documents, reading quickly but thoroughly, her instincts sharpening as she processed the irregularities. "These transactions are unusual, ma'am. They could indicate fraud. Or worse," she said, her tone calm but serious. Crystal's eyes widened. In that moment she realized how reliant she had become on Aisha's presence, her judgment, and her courage. The arrogance that had once defined her interactions with the maid had been replaced by trust and a quiet dependence she found difficult to admit. Together, they pored over the accounts, tracing each irregularity, and Aisha's attention to detail uncovered a pattern. Someone within the household's financial staff had been siphoning funds for months. Crystal felt a mix of shock and fear. This betrayal could have devastated the family's fortune and reputation. But as she looked at Aisha, poised, decisive, and unflinching, a sense of relief surged through her. Once again, the woman she had dismissed countless times was proving indispensable. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Crystal admitted softly, the words tasting foreign but sincere. Aisha's expression remained composed, but a flicker of warmth crossed her face. "We'll handle this, ma'am. Don't worry," she replied, her voice steady and reassuring. In that moment, Crystal understood something essential. Courage, loyalty, and intelligence were far more valuable than wealth or titles. And once again, Aisha had quietly saved the day, not from physical danger this time, but from a threat that could have shaken the very foundation of their lives. The days that followed were tense, filled with hushed conversations and careful surveillance. Crystal and Aisha worked side by side, a duo forged in necessity and strengthened by trust. Crystal had never imagined herself relying so heavily on her maid, yet every step she took now reminded her how vital Aisha's insight and courage had become. They pored over bank statements, cross-referenced receipts, and followed a trail of suspicious activity that led them to the mansion's finance department. Aisha's keen eye caught discrepancies that had gone unnoticed by professional accountants. Her intuition was uncanny. Crystal watched in awe as Aisha meticulously documented everything, her hands steady, her mind sharp. "It's all here," Aisha said, pointing to a series of transactions carefully hidden under legitimate expenses. "Someone's been covering their tracks, but there's a pattern. They've underestimated us." Crystal's heart pounded. For the first time, she fully grasped the depth of Aisha's intelligence and determination. The woman she had once insulted, dismissed, and looked down upon was now guiding her through a labyrinth of deceit, protecting the family's fortune and legacy with skill and courage. Crystal felt a deep, unfamiliar respect swell in her chest, mingled with guilt for all the time she had been cruel. They approached the implicated staff member's office cautiously, aware that confrontation could be dangerous. Aisha stepped forward first, calm and commanding, her presence alone enough to make Crystal feel a sense of security she had never felt before. "We need answers," Aisha said, her voice steady and firm, leaving no room for deflection. The staff member faltered under her gaze, and Crystal felt a mixture of relief and admiration. Aisha's courage and clarity had once again turned a dire situation into an opportunity to protect and assert control without resorting to anger or fear. Crystal silently vowed to herself that she would never again underestimate the woman who had repeatedly proven herself indispensable, not just in life-saving moments, but in the quiet, strategic battles that shaped their daily lives. That evening, as the mansion's lights glowed warmly against the night sky, Crystal understood a truth she had resisted for years. Respect is earned, not given, and loyalty, courage, and intelligence were worth more than all the wealth in the world. The next morning, tension hung thick in the air, almost as tangible as the polished marble floors beneath their feet. Crystal and Aisha approached the finance office with quiet determination, their steps measured, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The staff member responsible for the irregular transactions sat behind the desk, feigning concentration as they typed on a computer. Aisha's presence, calm yet commanding, immediately altered the room's energy. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't storm in with accusations. Instead, she placed the evidence in front of the staff member, carefully documented, undeniable proof of months of embezzlement. "We need the truth," Aisha said evenly, her dark eyes unwavering. Crystal stood beside her, a silent pillar of support, feeling a strange mixture of pride and humility. She remembered how she had once belittled this woman, never imagining that Aisha would one day guide her through such a delicate, high-stakes confrontation. The staff member shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Crystal but clearly aware that Aisha was in control. I didn't think anyone would notice," they stammered. Aisha's voice remained calm but firm. "Mistakes or deceit, the consequences are serious. You've put this family at risk." Crystal watched, realizing how Aisha's steady courage had a weight far greater than any authority Crystal had ever wielded. She understood, in that moment, that Aisha's value went far beyond cleaning or household duties. Her intelligence, composure, and bravery were formidable tools, the kind that could safeguard lives and fortunes alike. As the staff member confessed and began rectifying their mistakes under Aisha's guidance, Crystal felt a surge of admiration and shame for her past arrogance. She had underestimated the very person who had repeatedly saved her, both from immediate danger and from the silent, creeping threats that could have destroyed their lives. By the end of the day, the mansion had returned to a semblance of order, but the balance had shifted. Crystal no longer viewed Aisha merely as a maid. She was a protector, a strategist, a woman whose quiet strength demanded respect. And though Crystal had learned humility the hard way, she realized that some lessons were worth the pain, especially when they revealed the true character of someone she had once thought beneath her. The mansion, now peaceful, reflected the unspoken truth. Courage and loyalty could never be measured by wealth or status. In the days following the confrontation, a subtle but unmistakable change took hold in the mansion. Crystal moved through the halls differently now, her sharp eyes softened by a growing awareness of Aisha's value. She no longer issued orders with biting impatience. Instead, she asked questions, listened carefully, and sought Aisha's advice on even the smallest details. That morning, as Aisha prepared the living room for the family's weekly brunch, Crystal approached her with a gentle, almost tentative tone. "Aisha, would you mind helping me decide on the flower arrangements today?" she asked, gesturing toward the vase of roses and lilies. Aisha looked up, her dark eyes reflecting quiet surprise, but also a flicker of approval. "Of course, ma'am," she replied, moving beside Crystal to offer her expertise. As they worked together, Crystal realized how much she had underestimated the maid's knowledge and taste. Every suggestion Aisha made was thoughtful, precise, and elegant, transforming the room into a space that radiated warmth and sophistication. For the first time, Crystal felt a sense of partnership rather than hierarchy, a shared purpose rather than a power imbalance. Later, as breakfast was served and the family gathered in the dining room, Crystal made a point of acknowledging Aisha's contributions openly. "The house looks beautiful thanks to Aisha's guidance," she said, her voice steady, genuine, and free of condescension. Aisha nodded, her expression calm but her posture slightly more assured, knowing that her efforts were finally recognized. The other staff members noticed the change as well. Crystal's respect had a ripple effect, inspiring more harmony and cooperation throughout the household. That evening, Crystal reflected quietly on the transformation. The fear and guilt from past arrogance had been replaced with humility and gratitude, while Aisha's patience and competence had earned her a place of true respect in the mansion. Crystal realized that wealth and status might command attention, but they could never inspire loyalty, courage, or trust. Those qualities had to be earned, and Aisha had proven time and again that she possessed them in abundance. The mansion, once cold and distant, now felt alive with mutual respect, a space where humility and courage could coexist alongside opulence and privilege. For the first time, Crystal understood the profound impact of valuing people for who they truly were, not what she assumed them to be. The calm of the mansion was abruptly shattered one late afternoon when Crystal received a panicked call from her husband. Their young child had taken a serious fall in the garden, and the situation was urgent. Crystal's heart raced as she ran toward the nursery, the familiar halls of the mansion now feeling suffocating with anxiety. She was unprepared for the fear clawing at her chest, and for the first time in her life, she felt entirely vulnerable. Aisha, who had been in the kitchen preparing refreshments, immediately sensed the urgency. Without hesitation, she dropped what she was doing and sprinted alongside Crystal, her face set with determination. "It's going to be okay, ma'am," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the chaos. In the nursery, their child was lying on the floor, crying and clutching his leg. Crystal's panic spiked, and she felt frozen, helpless, as she fumbled to lift her child. Aisha knelt beside them, examining the injury with calm precision. She gently assessed the situation, immobilized the leg to prevent further damage, and guided Crystal with clear, concise instructions on what to do until medical help arrived. Crystal followed every word, amazed at how composed and capable Aisha was, her hands steady, her mind sharp under pressure. As the paramedics arrived, Aisha ensured their child was safely transferred, communicating every important detail while comforting Crystal, who now felt the weight of her own previous arrogance. The experience left Crystal shaken, but also profoundly grateful. She finally understood that Aisha's value went far beyond housekeeping. She was a protector, a problem solver, and a calm presence in moments of crisis. When the child was safely on the way to the hospital, Crystal grasped Aisha's hands, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she admitted, her pride fully dissolved. Aisha smiled gently, her composure unwavering. "You would have done your best, ma'am. That's all anyone can ask," she said. In that moment, Crystal realized that trust and respect were not just words, they were earned in the heat of crisis, through courage, quick thinking, and unwavering loyalty. The mansion, once filled with tension and arrogance, now seemed to pulse with a new life, grounded in the strength and bond of these two women who had discovered the true meaning of partnership. The following morning, the mansion was unusually quiet, the sunlight streaming softly through the large windows, glinting off the polished marble floors. Crystal had barely slept, her thoughts consumed by the previous day's events. She knew she could no longer treat Aisha as just a maid. The woman had proven herself invaluable time and again, saving lives, uncovering deceit, and maintaining order under pressure. Determined to express her gratitude in a way words alone could not convey, Crystal approached Aisha in the grand kitchen. The maid was busy arranging breakfast, her movements smooth and practiced, yet there was a subtle tension in her shoulders as if she, too, carried the memory of yesterday's crisis. Crystal cleared her throat, a little unsure of how to begin. "Aisha, I've been thinking," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done, not just yesterday, but all the times I failed to see your worth. You've been more than a maid. You've been our protector, our guide, and our guardian." Aisha paused, her dark eyes meeting Crystal's with quiet humility. "Thank you, ma'am," she replied, her voice steady, but there was a warmth in her gaze that reflected genuine acknowledgement. Crystal stepped closer and handed Aisha an envelope, neatly sealed. Inside was a letter of recognition, a generous bonus, and an offer to oversee aspects of household management, with authority previously reserved for staff of higher rank. "I want you to know that your courage, intelligence, and loyalty are valued," Crystal said. "I trust you, and I want your contributions recognized properly." Aisha's eyes widened slightly, the gesture touching her deeply, but her expression remained composed. "I'm grateful, ma'am," she said, her tone firm yet gentle. Crystal smiled, a sense of relief and pride washing over her. For the first time, she understood that wealth and status could never substitute for character and integrity. Aisha, once underestimated, now stood as an equal in influence, her actions shaping the household as much as any privilege could. The mansion seemed to hum with a new energy that day, filled not just with luxury, but with trust, respect, and gratitude, the foundation of relationships that could weather any storm. Crystal realized that true leadership wasn't about command, it was about recognizing and valuing the courage and strength in others, and in Aisha, she had discovered both. Weeks later, the mansion's calm was once again disrupted, but this time by something entirely unforeseen. A sudden blackout swept through the city, plunging the expansive home into darkness. The hum of appliances ceased, and shadows stretched across the ornate hallways. Crystal felt a flicker of panic, a visceral reminder of how dependent she had become on comfort and control. She reached for her phone, only to find the battery dead, and the thought of navigating the massive mansion in darkness made her stomach twist with anxiety. Aisha, however, remained composed. She retrieved a flashlight from a kitchen drawer and flicked it on, its beam cutting through the darkness like a steady beacon. "Follow me, ma'am. Everything will be okay," she said, her tone calm yet authoritative. Crystal hesitated for a moment, then nodded, trusting Aisha's guidance without question. They moved together through the hallways, the light bouncing off polished surfaces, revealing the familiar opulence in a completely new, unsettling context. But the situation escalated when Crystal's young child wandered into the corridor, frightened by the sudden shadows and noises. Crystal's heart leapt into her throat, and panic threatened to consume her. Without hesitation, Aisha sprang forward, scooping the child into her arms while reassuring him with a calm, soothing voice. Crystal followed, her steps shaky but steadied by Aisha's unwavering presence. Once they were safely in the nursery, Aisha methodically secured the windows, checked for hazards, and kept both mother and child calm until the backup generator kicked in. Crystal, watching her maid handle the crisis with courage, intelligence, and empathy, felt a profound sense of awe. She realized that Aisha's loyalty wasn't conditional. It wasn't motivated by money or fear. It came from integrity and a genuine commitment to protecting those in her care. Crystal's pride had completely melted away, replaced by gratitude and admiration. "I don't know how to ever thank you properly," Crystal whispered, her voice trembling with relief. Aisha smiled faintly, placing the child gently into Crystal's arms. "Just doing what's right, ma'am. That's enough," she said. In that instant, Crystal understood the true depth of their bond. A relationship no longer defined by hierarchy, but by trust, respect, and shared courage. Qualities far stronger than wealth or status could ever create. The mansion had weathered storms, intruders, and crises, but nothing prepared Crystal or Aisha for the emergency that arrived one late evening. A fire broke out in the kitchen, smoke curling upward in thick, choking clouds. The alarms blared, shattering the relative calm of the household. Crystal froze in terror, her mind racing, panic threatening to take over as flames licked the walls. Memories of past incidents, Her near fall, the intruder, her child's injury, all flashed through her mind, magnifying her fear. Aisha, however, reacted instantly. She grabbed a fire extinguisher, guiding Crystal toward a safe exit while instructing the other staff to assist in evacuating the household. Her voice was firm, commanding, yet calm, a beacon of control in the chaos. Crystal clutched her child close, her hands shaking, and followed Aisha's lead, realizing fully that without her, the situation could have been catastrophic. Together, they navigated smoke-filled corridors, dodging falling objects and avoiding flames, until they reached the safety of the garden outside. Crystal gasped for air, her heart hammering, her pride and fear giving way to overwhelming relief. She turned to look at Aisha, who was checking that everyone had evacuated and that no one remained trapped inside. Crystal's chest swelled with admiration and gratitude, tears stinging her eyes. "Aisha, you saved all of us again," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Aisha simply nodded, the smoke-smudged face calm but resolute. "We all need to stay safe, ma'am. That's what matters," she replied. In that moment, Crystal understood the depth of her own transformation. She had once belittled this woman, treated her with disdain, and never acknowledged her courage. Yet now, Aisha's bravery, intelligence, and unwavering dedication had protected everyone Crystal loved. The fire, though dangerous, had illuminated a deeper truth. True strength and heroism often come quietly, without recognition, and true respect is earned through deeds, not status. Crystal knew, as she watched the fire being controlled by the responding team, that she would never again underestimate Aisha. This maid, once dismissed, had become the guardian of her family, her life, and her conscience. A hero whose actions had permanently reshaped the mansion and everyone within it. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth, power, and tension, now radiated a warmth and harmony that had long been absent. Days after the fire, the staff returned to their duties, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Crystal moved through the halls with a newfound humility, her interactions with Aisha marked by respect, gratitude, and genuine warmth. No longer a distant, haughty mistress, she listened, sought guidance, and even laughed alongside her maid, discovering in the process the joy of mutual trust and understanding. Aisha, once silent and deferential, now carried herself with quiet confidence, her insight valued and her courage recognized. She managed household operations with authority, her voice calm but commanding, her advice sought by everyone from the staff to Crystal herself. The mansion seemed to reflect this transformation. The sunlight now danced softly across polished floors, the rooms felt alive with purpose, and even the grandiose opulence seemed less intimidating, tempered by the human connections that gave it meaning. One afternoon, Crystal paused in the living room, watching Aisha arrange flowers with meticulous care. "I don't know how I ever survived without you," she admitted, her voice sincere. Aisha looked up, a faint, knowing smile crossing her face. "We all do our part, ma'am. That's what matters," she replied. Crystal nodded, feeling a deep sense of clarity. She understood now that status and wealth were meaningless without courage, loyalty, and integrity. In Aisha, she had found a protector, a guide, and a friend. Someone whose actions had repeatedly saved lives and preserved the family's legacy. The bond between them was no longer defined by social hierarchy, but by trust, respect, and shared experiences that tested their character. The mansion, once cold and oppressive, now hummed with warmth and life. Crystal's arrogance had been replaced with humility, Aisha's patience rewarded with recognition, and together they had forged a household where respect and courage were the foundation. As Crystal watched her family and staff go about their day, she realized that the true measure of a person was not in their wealth, status, or outward appearance, but in their courage, loyalty, and capacity for action when it mattered most. And in that realization, the mansion, and everyone within it, had been forever transformed.